And ladies and gentlemen in the media, thank you for being here today. As a former daily newspaper reporter myself, whose son was smart enough to marry the newscaster of the largest television station in South Carolina and then be elected Attorney General, I'm very happy to be with you today. And I'm actually Congressman and Ranking Member and soon-to-be Chairman Mike McCaul is currently on the House floor with his bill, which is so appropriate at this time, about war crimes. And so we're very grateful to be here expressing our concern about a new Iran deal. And hey, this should be bipartisan, and it has been. I'm really grateful that, and I've had the opportunity in New York to work with Senator Joe Lieberman to raise the issues about an Iran deal, how irresponsible it is. I've had the opportunity to work with former Chairman Eliot Engel of New York. Again, how irresponsible it is to have a restored Iran deal, knowing what we already know, and that is it's suicidal. Indeed, Iran has announced death to America, death to Israel. And we know that when they agreed to the last, that they never stopped developing ICBMs. They called it for launching of satellites. Come on, let's get real. There's only one purpose of an ICBM, and it's to deliver a nuclear weapon to attack the United States. And that's the only reason. So it's suicidal to do what apparently is being done. And then it's insane. The thought that we would be working with Putin to do the negotiations, a person who, as a war criminal, reveals himself every day as an individual that's not trustworthy, and the thought that that would be America's negotiator, that is just, it's beyond inconceivable, and that's why we're here today. And I'm also really grateful that Republicans have alternatives. We have the Maximum Pressure Act with 129 co-sponsors already to put maximum pressure, not to appease and acquiesce to the mullahs of Tehran. Additionally, we need to know that part of this would be to remove the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps from designation as a terrorist organization. That's inconceivable. We know that they provided the IEDs. Two of my sons served in Iraq. They survived, but over 600 Americans were killed by the IEDs provided by Iran. And they make no secret of that. And then they continue. As recently as 2 weeks ago, the attacks on Saudi Arabia, the attacks on the UAE. How incredible with the drones and UAVs that they've launched, the attacks on the people of Yemen. And then if you have any doubt at Bolling Air Force Base, we have the remains of these drones and UAVs. And the people are, Iran is so audacious that, in fact, the vehicles say made in Iran. I mean, so how could you miss it? And so with that in mind, we're here today to express opposition to dealing with the tyrannical regime that oppresses the extraordinary people of Iran. I have a really wonderful Iranian-American community in South Carolina, and it's just heartbreaking to see what they face. We're grateful today with so many members here, and at this time we have Steve Chabot, another ranking member.
Thank you very much, Joe. I'm the former chairman of the Middle East Subcommittee of Foreign Affairs and the current ranking member of the Asia and Pacific Subcommittee. The Biden administration's decision to renegotiate the disastrous Iran deal is a terrible idea for a whole range of reasons. The first deal was bad enough. The Obama administration negotiated a lousy deal which provided the Iranians sweeping sanctions relief in exchange for weak nuclear commitments without rigorous inspections, all of which expired after several years anyway. And that's not to mention the plane loads of cash that the Obama administration gave to the Iranians. All this allowed the mullahs to supercharge their terror campaign throughout the Middle East. This, of course, included propping up Assad in Syria, using the Houthis to attack both Saudi Arabia and the UAE, targeting U.S. military personnel in Iraq, and supporting Hezbollah's genocidal ambitions against our ally Israel. President Biden brought back the same people who sold out our country and our allies to Iran the first time. This time, it looks like the deal will be even worse. And as Joe mentioned, what's particularly sickening is Russia's role in this New Deal. They've served as key negotiators in getting this New Deal, and I suspect that we'll see a rush to increase ties between Russia and Iran once this deal is signed. Most damning of all is Russia is likely to be able to use Iran to avoid our Ukrainian sanctions, thus diluting their impact. This is a terrible deal and ought to be rejected. Thank you very much,
Steve. And we now have Congressman Scott Perry of Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. And I'm very proud to stand with my colleagues here that fight every day to save the Republic, and on this occasion are fighting to save the free world from the horrors of another nuclear-armed terrorist state. So I boil this down to three things for you. First of all, the Biden administration, the president, is not competent to negotiate this arrangement. He doesn't have the judgment to do it, number one. Number two, Iran cannot be trusted. They've been violating the agreement all along, whether it's enriching in Fordow, production of centrifuges, and just the continuation of the program in general. And then number three, this is not an agreement. This is a treaty. It was a treaty the first time, and they worked around the United States Senate and the Congress and the Constitution to pass it. This is a whole new deal, a whole new agreement, and it is a treaty, and it must come before the Congress, before the United States Senate for ratification, or it is invalid. The last one wasn't signed by anybody. It wasn't honored by Iran or any of their partners. We cannot trust them. We cannot allow this to happen. And that's the reason we must reject it. I stand in solidarity with these members here. They're trying to save the free world from the horrors of another nuclear-armed terrorist state. Now yield back.
Thank you, Scott. And we now have Congressman Darrell Issa of California.
One of the things about a press conference like this is that everyone's going to tell you the same thing. That's why we're here in unity against the return to the JCPOA. Many people are talking about it being renegotiated. From what I can tell, it will be the same deal, except in the interim, while Iran was bound by the JCPOA, while there was still a deal in effect between them and the Europeans, while they were still enjoying the benefits throughout the entire Trump period, they went from a cap of 3.6% to 20% enrichment of uranium, and they bragged about it. During the intervening period, the people that we used as negotiators in the Obama administration, Russia, who during that administration, during those negotiations, invaded Crimea. Now during the negotiations, they've invaded the rest of Ukraine. So my short addition to what you'll hear again and again here is we are negotiating with someone who cannot be trusted and cannot be verified, and we're using an interlocutor who has proven to use this role to simultaneously commit war crimes and invade another country. They haven't done it once, they've done it twice. So as my mother would say, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on all of us.
Thank you, Darrell. And we now have Congressman and Governor-to-be Lee Zeldin.
Thank you. There were three issues that I had with the 2015 deal more than any other issues. One was the sunset provisions. Two was the flaws in the verification regime. And third was not dealing with Iran's non-nuclear bad activities. By not adjusting the sunset provision dates, that actually makes this next deal worse than the original deal. By not doing anything to strengthen the flaws with the verification regime, and by still not dealing with any of Iran's non-nuclear bad activities, the leverage that brings the Iranians to the table in the first place is once again negotiated away where you're not going to be able to deal with any of that. On top of that, if you want to remove the IRGC from the terrorist designation, again, you're talking about entering into a deal that is worse than the original 2015 agreement. Under that 2015 agreement, you saw Iran with assembling more IR-6s and IR-8s, twice with more heavy water than was permitted. That was the IAEA that confirmed that. The attempted acquisition of carbon fiber. So when you analyze Iran's behavior as it relates to the 2015 deal, on many different fronts, Iran, which cannot help itself to cheat, but to cheat, they on multiple occasions were doing activities that were not in compliance with the JCPOA. I agree with Congressman Perry. This should be brought to Congress as a treaty. If it's not ratified, it is non-binding. Also, the one other lesson learned that's really important is that under INARA, there's one component of it that was ignored. The 60-day clock had started in 2015, even though the verification agreement between the IAEA and Iran had not yet been submitted to Congress. The clock starts when the entire agreement comes to Congress. The clock does not start under INARA when you send most of the agreement. I thank all my colleagues for their leadership. Congressman Wilson, thank you for leading us here today. It is important that the Biden administration stand strong, stand firm, and refuse to engage in a negotiation and enter into a deal that is actually even worse than the 2015 nuclear agreement.
Thank you very much, Lee. And we have Congressman Andy Barr of Kentucky.
Thank you, Joe, and appreciate my colleagues' leadership in opposition to a renewed JCPOA. This Biden administration effort to rejoin the Iran nuclear deal is flawed in at least three ways. One, flawed in process. Two, flawed in substance. And three, flawed in verification protocols. Flawed in process because, as my colleague Congressman Zeldin pointed out, an agreement of this magnitude should be submitted to the Congress in the form of a treaty. That's why I introduced the Iran Nuclear Deal Advise and Consent Act, which would require submission by the Biden administration to the Senate to treat this as a treaty. INARA is, of course, current law. I do not have confidence in speaking to the administration that they will submit this to the Congress because they don't have the support. They don't have Democrat support for this deal, and so they're going to, I predict, will violate the terms of INARA. Second, on substance, the maximum pressure campaign that the previous administration had engaged with was working. Iran's foreign currency reserve dropped 95% because of the reimposition of tough sanctions on Iran. The Iranian military budget dropped 25%, and Iranian militia proxies cut the pay of their fighters in half. Maximum pressure was working. Why on earth would we relieve that pressure is beyond me. And then finally, on verification. The Congress and the Foreign Affairs Committee specifically was briefed by Director General Grossi of the IAEA, and it was very clear to both Democrats and Republicans that under the previous JCPOA, verification was flawed because by the terms of the JCPOA, additional protocols were not in place. What that means is that when there is an undeclared site of nuclear activity, where there's evidence of nuclear activity at an undeclared site, typically the IAEA implements additional protocols where they are allowed to investigate those sites. The very terms of the JCPOA did not allow the IAEA to put into place those additional protocols. I have pressed the Biden National Security Team on whether or not additional protocols would be part of a second JCPOA. They have not answered that question. Look for that. As the press corps, you need to ask and press the Biden administration on these additional protocols. If there are no additional protocols, there's no verification. It is a flawed deal.
Thank you very much, Andy. We now have Congresswoman Claudia Tenney of New York.
Thank you so much, Joe, and thank you to all my colleagues here for being here to be against the JCPOA, otherwise known as the Iran nuclear deal, as most people know it as. The Biden administration is continuing to go down this dangerous road to renegotiate this agreement. I have called on Rob Malley in a letter to the administration to come before the Congress in an open setting, not in closed-door meetings, to talk about what's going on so the American people know what's happening with the negotiations. This is a failed deal. Up to $90 billion in sanctions could go to the Iranians, also including sanctions to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, which would be a disaster, redesignating them as a non-terrorist, as a terrorist foreign terrorist organization. I'm concerned that that designation is going to be is not going to happen. Also, in terms of negotiating the new deal, I agree with what Andy Barr has indicated. We did see and have all eyes were definitely alerted when Rafael Grossi briefed our committee on how dangerous this situation is and that we cannot afford to continue onward with this deal. It will be a great imposition against freedom and again, safety of our allies, particularly in the Middle East, who are opposed to this deal as well. I join my colleagues, though, in condemning this and urge the Biden administration not to engage in this dangerous deal that is being negotiated behind closed doors and not transparently, so the American people can actually see what's at stake for us, and we have the opportunity to question the negotiators. Again, I reiterate, really just the problematic nature of having the Russians at the bargaining table with us as they commit atrocities and murder in Ukraine. So with that, I yield.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you for your military family service. And now we have an American hero, Congressman Brian Mast of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. And I appreciate Chairman deferring to me. You know, get any job done, you got to have the right tool for the job. And this administration, it's just not the right tool for American strength or American diplomacy. We have Wendy Sherman testifying on the Hill today, and I want to use her own words to just demonstrate how difficult it is for this administration to come out for Americans in any strong way. When she was negotiating the first deal, this is what she said was key to the negotiation. We had to make sure our military was arrayed in such a way to say that we are serious. If we have to take military action to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon because nothing else works, we will, and let them know that we have weapons that will penetrate places like Fordo. And they also helped other oil-producing nations make more oil to put more pressure on Iran. Those were keys to them, by their own admission, working the first time. Because of what's happened in Ukraine, because of what's happened in Afghanistan, because of the way that they effectively neuter our military in this administration, they don't have the ability to make sure that Iran knows that we are serious, by her own words, and that if we have to take military action to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran because nothing else works, that we will. They don't have that ability. I'd challenge anybody to prove to me otherwise. And again, the opposite of what they'd been doing in the previous negotiation, helping other oil-producing nations produce oil. We're in the exact opposite situation of that today, where Iran has the rest of the globe in a situation, and the United States, this administration, trying to get their hands on their oil. That is not the position of American strength, whether for diplomatic efforts or our national security in any other way, and their negotiations are putting us all in danger.
Thank you very much, Brian. And we now have Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee.
Thank you, Ranking Member, for that impassioned but long introduction. Thank you all for allowing me to be here. And I want to thank Ranking Member McCall, my good friend. You know, a nuclear deal with Iran jeopardizes the national security of our Middle Eastern friends. Iran will receive billions of dollars in sanctions relief if Tehran's negotiators get their way. Lifting our economic sanctions on Iran would be a financial lifeline to terror groups. Backed by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, they operate throughout the Middle East. Israel is constantly threatened by rocket attacks from Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. But under this agreement, the IRGC, now flush with cash, would be able to help these groups expand their missile stockpiles. Remember Hamas's attack on Israel last May. We should be taking steps to prevent another bombardment like that from happening instead of foolishly strengthening Israel's enemies. Israel's prime minister and foreign ministers are already sounding the alarm. They recently said Hamas, Hezbollah, and the other IRGC-supported groups will kill Jews because they are Jews. I do not doubt the words from their closest ally, Israel, in the Middle East. You know, when a dirtbag murderer tells you he's going to murder again, dadgummit, he will murder again. And that's what these people will do, and we should take their word for it. Other countries where the IRGC is influential will face security threats if our economic sanctions are lifted on Iran. The IRGC backs Houthi rebels in Yemen as well as violent militias operating in Iraq. Of course, I worry that these countries, as well as others in the region, will risk becoming proxies for the Ayatollah if this deal moves forward. When the Biden administration botched the withdrawal in Afghanistan, it made a really major mistake that weakened America's reputation in the region. And I hope this administration wakes up and realizes it's walking into another disaster by agreeing to this nuclear deal with Iran. Thank you, Ranking
Thank you,
Member.
Tim. And we now have Congressman Mark Green, another outspoken and second representative from the state of Tennessee.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Chairman, and thank my colleagues for being here. And thank you for being here. This is important. This is a news story that should be out there a lot more than it has been recently. I think most of you know my history as a veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan, 2 trips to Iraq. And I will tell you that there are brothers and sisters in arms that I have that are dead because of the Iranian IEDs. They were killed by these improvised explosive devices by Iranians. One of the things we struggle with today, a lot of people struggle with, is something called survivor guilt, where our veterans have taken their lives because they survived when their buddy was blown up by an Iranian IED. In 1979, the Iranian state, the new revolution, occurred, of course, and they declared war on the United States. Their constitution, if you go read their constitution, it specifically says that that country exists for one purpose, and that purpose is global domination of their radical form of Islam. To make a deal with them, we'd have to go back on our own history and deny who they are. Yet this administration thinks that they'll do just that. In 2015, the Obama-Biden administration made a deal, and that deal was quickly broken by the Iranians, whether it was ballistic missiles, as you've heard, or enriched uranium. I met with the Director General of the IAEA on a trip just recently, just a few weeks ago. And he said, right now in Iran, we know they have unidentified, undeclared, illegal nuclear material. Right now. Yet our administration wants to go and make a deal with these guys. And you think about the Russian involvement that's already been mentioned. I'll add just a little bit to it. This administration is actually considering allowing Russia to build for $10 billion the nuclear power plant in Iran. Think about that. To get around the very sanctions we're implementing on them right now for their actions in Ukraine. Now, that makes no sense at all. Yet that's what Joe Biden is thinking about doing. You know, Bill Gates, or Robert Gates, Secretary of Defense, for 2 presidents, 1 Democrat and 1 Republican, instead of Joe Biden, in 40 years in the Senate, he's never gotten a single foreign policy decision right. Well, he's still batting 0. Come on, Mr. President, you got a chance here. Hit 1 at least. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mark. And we now, Dan Muser of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much, Chairman. Appreciate it. While we're quoting people, I think I remember President Obama also stating that never underestimate Joe's ability to screw things up. I'm not sure if that's a direct quote,
No,
but
say Joe Biden, please. Please clarify which Joe.
I think everybody knows. Listen, this is a catastrophe, just in a long list of catastrophes. The statements made here, I don't know how they're going to spin this one or what they would come in here and state to you in a press conference as to why this needs to occur. We were on a call just the other day with various members of other countries, parliaments, from the Knesset to the UK to throughout Europe and the Baltic states. And they're all Middle East, Bahrain, as well as the UAE, is very, very fearful of this deal taking place, as are the Saudis. It will do nothing but send in the neighborhood of $100 billion to the #1 center of terrorism in the world. And that's absolutely factual. Go take a trip through Israel and see how Hamas and Hezbollah and the other terrorist groups are being funded by Iran. Nothing will stop the development of the enrichment to be weaponized. Certainly not catering to Iran. Iran desperately needs this deal. Desperately. Their economy is in shambles. There are uprisings in the streets. You have their supreme leader saying what Israel needs is the final solution, and we certainly know all what that is. And yet, here's the U.S. top diplomats at the table working on a so-called agreement with a country that has proven itself not to live up to even any sort of agreement or their word.
So it's outrageous. We need to do what we can do to stop it. It will be not just damaging for the Middle East, but for all of humanity. And that's a direct quote, actually, from one of the leaders of the Knesset. I yield back. Thank you,
And
Joe.
thank you so much, Dan, and Congressman August Pfluger of Texas. Yes, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. Even better, we have Congressman Chris Smith of New Jersey. Oh my God. Hey, okay, Peter Mayer, all the way from the Republic of Michigan.
Thank you. We can do one for three.
No, this is
Thank you, Joe, and thank you to our ranking member. You know, I want to follow up on what Mr. Green said about the IEDs that we saw in Iraq, because I served in Iraq from 2010 to 2011, and these IEDs, we called them EFPs, explosively formed penetrators. It was a copper ingot that was a shaped charge, and when detonated with the explosives towards the rear, would send molten copper into any of our vehicles. It could penetrate all of our armor and just wreaked devastating havoc. That's what Iran has shown they're willing to spread throughout the region. And if the belief of the Biden administration is that a nuclear deal will sufficiently constrain Iran, that'll prevent them from building a nuclear weapon, you know, we can go back and forth on rhetoric, but if you talk to any of the folks in that region, talk to the countries that will be most directly impacted by it, talk to the Emiratis, talk to the Saudis, talk to the Israelis, you will hear nothing but concern. If the people who will be most at risk of this are terrified of this deal going through, that should tell us something. And the fact that Russia is the intermediary, Mr. Perry was mentioning about this should be a treaty. Congress should have a role in this, right? Look 18 years ago at the Budapest Memorandum signed by the Russians, by the United States. They have seen how empty the promises on that piece of paper were now that Ukraine has been invaded. And the same time we're hearing about horrific rapes and murders and atrocities committed by the Russians. We're somehow believing that they have the interests of the free world at heart and that they really want peace and prosperity. It is ridiculous, and we should not be accepting this.
Thank you very much, Peter. And we have an interlude on the floor, so we're very fortunate that we have Ranking Member Chairman to be Mike McCall.
No, well, okay, thank you. I want to thank all my colleagues for showing up and being here today on this important issue. I was on the floor debating the war crimes bill to call out Putin for what he is, a war criminal, and to hold him accountable in light of the atrocities. And there are many. After what we saw in Bucha, bring in mobile crematoriums to hide their evidence. It's one of the sickest things I've seen in my lifetime. But this is one of the biggest threats as well. And what is it? 1979, I mean, you know, the Russians invade Afghanistan. Weakness invites aggression, right? An embassy taken over by terrorists. A nation taken over by terrorists. The Islamic Republic of Iran. And to this day, they're still the threat. They are the bully on the block. That was 1979. I thought that was the worst president I'd seen in my lifetime. And now, my God, how many hotspots? You know, Russians invade Ukraine. You know, Chairman Xi is looking at Taiwan. Iran feels emboldened and empowered, as do all of our foreign adversaries now. And what does Kim Jong-un do? He fired off 2 ICBMs just this month. This is a far more dangerous world, and it goes back to peace through strength, which works, or if you project weakness, this is what you get. This deal projects nothing but weakness. A nuclear Iran is unacceptable. That is the message to tell Iran. You want to sit down with us? And by the way, they won't sit with us. They sit with E3, and the Russians are at the negotiating table, negotiating on our best behalf, as if they have our national security interest at heart after what they have done and the war crimes. You really can't make this up. You really can't make it up. In less than a year, they will have much less than under the 2015 deal. The sunsets will come in. This is a problem, is there are sunsets. If anyone here believes this is for a peaceful nuclear energy program, wow, how naive. They have one goal in mind, and that's to be a nuclear power and the bully on the block in a rough neighborhood. And what effect is that going to have on the neighborhood? It will start a nuclear arms race. The Saudis will buy one from Pakistan. And you're going to see the world far more dangerous. The prohibition on their missile program expires in 18 months. The centrifuge production and R&D will be lifted in 24, 25. It absolutely guarantees a nuclear run at the end of the day. You know, and to get to this deal, he's going to lift these sanctions on probably some of the most dangerous people on the planet that you heard from our veterans here, you know, have suffered, particularly from Soleimani, who I was very proud the previous administration under Trump brought him to justice, his final justice and reward for 2 decades of terror on this planet. They still chant death to America. You know, how can you negotiate or trust someone like this? There is still no prohibition on ICBMs. They are required, this administration, under the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act that we passed, to come before Congress, submit the plan before, and then have a vote. But they got some pretty good lawyers over there. I'm a lawyer. I can spot them. They got some pretty darn good lawyers. They're going to try to get around this law that Congress passed and just bypass it. That's insulting to the American people. To not even allow the American people, through their representatives, have a voice in this entire deal, which should be a treaty. Finally, to lift the terrorist designations on the IRGC, and I introduced the bill to name them designate them a terrorist organization, to lift that designation. And this is something they're considering. This is, again, one of the most dangerous messages, that we could be sending them. I had the opportunity to go to Israel with Leader McCarthy when this deal started to come out. And I met with Prime Minister Bennett and former Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Speaker of the Knesset. They are resoundingly against this. And that should tell you a lot, because they know this threat a heck of a lot better than we do, because they live right next to it. And to them, it's a threat next door. And guess who's going to be number one on their target? And then guess who's going to be after that? And they have short-range ballistic capability that they can attach a nuclear warhead to and aim it straight at Israel, and their Iron Dome can't stop it. And if they get ICBM capability, guess who's going to be their next target after the Saudis? Be the United States of America. This is a bad deal, as Prime Minister Netanyahu always talked about. In fact, this is worse than the 2015 deal. I would urge the administration to stop this and reject this. And, you don't have to cut a deal just for the sake of cutting a deal. You can always walk away from the table. And I would urge them to walk away.
Thank you very much, Chairman Mike McCall. And we're very fortunate to have Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis of Staten Island, New York.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you to the ranking member for putting this all together, because it is incredibly important that we stand together and speak out against what is a very dangerous step that the president is looking to take. It's clear that everyone around the world is looking to take advantage once again of the United States of America, because we have a weak leader who has made one bad foreign policy decision after another since coming in. Now, my colleagues spoke out and made a very good case. I'm simply going to add that Iran has also been very clear that they're looking to conduct attacks, even on our own soil, against Americans, okay? And I represent Brooklyn. Last year, we had an Iranian-American journalist in Brooklyn that there was a plan to attempt to kidnap her by the Iranian government. In 2011, Iran was planning an assassination attempt against Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the United States while he was dining in Georgetown. And we need to take these threats seriously. When the previous Obama administration gave $400 million in cash to Iran, what do you think they were doing with it, right? They were funding terrorists. They were providing these explosives. They were providing these rockets that are being shot at Israel. And they are plotting these attempts. So these threats coupled with our open border, I think is an extremely dangerous situation. And I urge the president to please, let's put American safety first. And that means both securing our border, making sure this nefarious activity does not take place in our soil, and we don't negotiate with people who are threatening to conduct attacks on American soil or against Americans. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And Congresswoman Young Kim of California.
Thank you, everyone, members of the press, for coming to help amplify all of these united voice that we're sharing with you today as this Biden administration considers negotiating the new Iran nuclear deal with, much has been said, but I think it's worth repeating that time and time again, Iran has proven to be more interested in destabilizing Middle East and funding terrorism than contributing to global security. Iran continues to push forward with its nuclear program, destabilizing the Middle East and aiding terrorist militias in attacking our troops and security partners. Iran is a bad actor on the world stage, and they cannot be trusted. However, President Biden continues to negotiate with Iran from a position of weakness and is eager to get a deal. Any deal with Iranian regime must address the destabilizing security situation that Iran has purposefully created and recognize the horrible human rights record their regime has maintained for decades, including mass imprisonment, torture, and allowing extrajudicial killings of minority groups. I've called for bipartisan legislation to push back on the Iranian regime and support the Iranian people that has passed out of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Both sides of the aisle should be concerned that this administration is sidestepping Congress and moving at such a rapid pace without clear guarantees in negotiations with Iran, and meaning we could potentially get a nuclear deal that is worse terms now than, as many have said, worse than the 2015 JCPOA. We must show strength and utilize pressure and sanctions on the Iranian regime to support a more comprehensive negotiation strategy and stabilize regional security. What we are hearing from the negotiation process is just the opposite. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Young. And we now have Congresswoman Maria Salazar of Florida, and then we'll have Mike McCall answer all the questions.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, and thanks to all of you and to Ranking Member McCall for inviting us to this press conference. You know, there is another angle to this whole deal that it's very close to our home and usually is not reported by the news organization. You know, I represent the city of Miami, the capital of Latin America in the United States. We're very concerned for certain reasons that I'm going to explain to you. You know that this deal is it's simply handout to the Ayatollahs cold, hard cash. We're talking about around $130 billion, and that can buy a lot of terrorism. The VP of Iran stands directly to be benefited by this deal because in Argentina, I'm not sure if you guys remember, in Argentina, he masterminded in '94 the Israeli embassy bombing, killing 29 innocent people, including children, just because they were of Jewish descent. He is a comrade at this hour with Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua, with Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, and with Miguel Diaz-Canel in Cuba. In other words, there is a new alliance of tyrants forming in our hemisphere. And this new alliance is made up of Iran, China, and Russia, who are teaming up with Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. And Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, they are in our backyard. As Ronald Reagan used to say, Nicaragua is closer to Miami than Los Angeles or Houston. No one benefits. They all profit this new alliance of tyrants. They share weapons of war and a contempt for freedom. Let me just give you a few facts. Recently, Iran sold Venezuela 12 GODs, G-H-O-D. Those are drones. And what do you do with those drones? Well, you buy more terrorism, this case against Colombia, which is very close to Miami as well. Or you fight the Venezuelan internal opposition, or even the United States, as some of our colleagues have mentioned. There's nothing Venezuela under Nicolas Maduro would want more than an Iran with nuclear bombs. Even more, Chavez, when he was alive, he tried to sell or to give to the Ayatollahs uranium, because the Venezuelans have uranium. And they will do it again. Of course they will do it again. So President Biden is stumbling down another dark road, and he is emboldening what we just called an alliance of tyrants. If we help Iran, we're only allowing them to kill more innocent people, and specifically in our hemisphere. In other words, if there's an Iran with nuclear weapons, we have a very compromised Latin America, which happens to be our backyard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. And now, Chairman DeBee McCall.
Sure. I've had a short leash, but and I wanted my colleagues to be able to participate. But sure.
Thank you, Congressman. I wanted to ask you about what Congress can do. Earlier today, Democrats held a similar press conference raising similar concerns from the stage. Are you all working together, and do you feel like if it actually came to a vote, you could potentially achieve a two-thirds, like veto-proof majority?
Thanks for asking that. So we're drafting a discharge petition to mandate that the administration comply with the law in NARA, which we passed in Congress the last time this came around. And I think, there are, I really have to say, in our briefings, if I'm doing a whip count, I'm seeing a lot of Democrats that are with us. And all we need is 218 on that discharge to, first of all, comply with the law, which is crazy. You got to even ask for that. But then secondly, if they enter into this deal, there's a mechanism called a joint resolution of disapproval. And of course, Speaker Pelosi won't bring that to the floor. But again, we could use the same technique to bring that to the floor for a full vote, a joint resolution of disapproval by Congress. When we get the majority back, I can assure you that will be coming.
What's the timing on the discharge?
Yeah, Andy.
If I could just add something, some perspective about Democrats on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Chairman Meeks led a CODEL to Jerusalem in July. It was a bipartisan CODEL. We traveled and we met with the new Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett. And I think some of my Democrat colleagues were somewhat surprised to see absolutely no daylight between where Bennett, the new prime minister, the new government in Israel, was in opposition to the JCPOA versus the Netanyahu government. They were totally opposed to a renewed JCPOA. That made an impact. And when we got back to Washington, you have heard Democrats voice significant skepticism, and that's why I predict that this administration is going to circumvent INARA. They're not going to submit it to the Congress in violation of the law because they don't even have Democrat support.
Yeah, good question. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Congressman. There was a news out in the media that the negotiations, U.S. negotiation team asked Iran in return of moving IRGC out of FTO, they stopped taking revenge for killing of Soleimani. I wanted to know if you heard that and what's your reaction on this. Second, none of the sanctions on Iran has been removed officially, but the administration said intends about buying oil from Iran and Venezuela. How is that even possible?
Right, and they're not enforcing the sanctions is the key. I asked the Secretary, if you're going to lift one sanction, you need to come before the Congress and tell us what you got in return, right? But they're just not enforcing the sanctions is the big part. With respect to the IRGC, they're a killing machine. I seriously doubt that they are not going to avenge the death of Soleimani. I have a lot of people I know under indictment in Iran, and there are threats to Americans because of that. And so, I don't. I think that'd be a very dangerous thing to do. And actually, talk about Democrat support. If this is on there, lifting the terrorist designation, I think that's a poison pill that's going to split the Democratic Party in half on this, if not more. And so, yes.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah. No, we're not.
We had members of House Democrats talking about the IRGC and FU as well. This is the question that I don't get. This is something I don't get. If everyone knows that IRGC is a bad actor, terrorist activity, whatever, and the administration argues that reviving this deal is in national interest of the United States. It's national interest of the United States. How is that even possible?
How is that in the national? How is waiving the sanctions on Nord Stream 2 in the national interest of the United States of America, Putin's pipeline in Europe? How is lifting this designation in the national interest of the United States? How is lifting these sanctions, which will then put billions of dollars into terrorist activity, both in Lebanon and in Gaza, in Yemen, in our own backyard in Latin America, to fund these terror operations? How is that in our best interest? By the way, speaking of Russia, you know why they're in Syria? They want that warm water port. They also want to cut a deal with Iran to build a pipeline from Iran to the Mediterranean so they can sell their energy to Europe, while the Wagner Group is in northern Africa, like Libya, another energy power play. I think the energy aspect of all this, the Black Sea, Mediterranean, why do you think the Russians are even involved in this negotiation? Well, because they have leverage, they tell us. They have their own self-interest here, and it's not the interest of the United States of America.
And I'm sorry, I'm going to pull the Congress.
But I want to let the others speak too. I think you can see why we have such faith in Chairman-to-be Mike McCall. And I'd like to add, how in the news media, how could it be missed? The Iranian attack on Erbil. How incredible. And clearly it was the U.S. consulate. Come on. And to say otherwise is ridiculous. And then the missile attacks on Saudi Arabia. And thank goodness, okay, we're going to say something nice about the Biden administration. They provided Patriot missiles to Saudi Arabia. That should have been done a long time ago. And then we have the attacks on UAE by missiles and the threats to Bahrain, Qatar. Over and over again, it's just inconceivable. As I said, it's suicide for Israel and the United States to cut this deal, and it's also insane to have a deal being negotiated by the war criminals that now have taken over a great country, Russia. Excuse me, yes.
Basil John with Nexar, thank you for taking the question. So Congressman Gottheimer this morning, along with your Democratic colleagues, they expressed the concern about Iran reaching a threat level that's equal to Russia, and I know it was touched on briefly here. I want to get your thoughts on it. Do you see that if this deal goes through, they could reach that same level? And then to follow up on that, your thoughts on Russia's position in these
Oh, hey, absolutely. And again, this should, as I told you, this should be bipartisan, working with Joe Lieberman, with Elliot Engel. And so we would agree. And obviously, but it's just inconceivable to allow the theocrats of Tehran, who are oppressing the people of Iran, the great people of Persia, and to let them have such power. And Brian, too.
Why does Russia have power? And that's, a fundamental question that everybody should ask. One is because there's Europe and others that are reliant upon Russia for a fuel source. So number one, the more reliant that we are on Russia, the stronger that they are. That's one of the major problems. So if we want to keep our Iran from becoming the next Russia, don't be reliant on them at all. That's not rocket science. That's common sense. Obviously, if we open them up to world financial markets, to world lending markets, to distributing their products across the globe, they're a stronger country and they have more capability to put their resources into nuclear weapons or anything else that they decide to do. So the pathway is very clear to keep them from becoming as powerful as Russia. Don't be reliant upon them, and don't allow them the resources to go out there and join the nuclear club.
And yes.
Sort of a two-pronged question on maximum pressure. First part of it is,
even under maximum pressure, the enrichment continued, the missiles continued, the terrorist attacks continued. So, sort of, what is the path to making sure that maximum pressure actually sort of has a sizable impact on Iran? And part two of the question is, what do you see as the actual end goal of maximum pressure? Is it a stronger deal? Is it permanent containment? Is it regime change? Is it something else?
Well, maximum pressure, and I'm really concerned that we were applying maximum pressure because we should have identified whoever they were trading with and put pressure not just on the dictatorial regime in Tehran, but on any country that would be actually trading with them. There should be a ripple effect. And companies and businesses, there were ways that they got around it, which is very disappointing. And then it was equally disappointing that not all the members of EU were as cooperative as they should have been as the co-chair EU caucus. That concerned me. And then the consequence, I would look for containment. And then I also look to the young people of Iran that they want to live in a modern world where they are welcomed. And so I sincerely hope the young people of Iran can make an influence with a new government.
So, quick follow-up.
Sure.
As far as the sort of the second order people who are trading with Iran, are you basically saying the Trump administration didn't enforce maximum pressure as strongly as they could or should have?
My view, it's all governments have not, all allied governments have not done all that they can do, and every effort should be made to do that.
Look, what's the goal of maximum pressure? It's this. What has historically worked to keep Iran from acquiring and developing technology that we figured out in the 1940s? Think about that. What did we figure out in the 1940s that people can't replicate today with some basic college level physics? Why haven't they been able to do that? Because they don't have the resources to do it. They don't have the fissile material to do it. They don't have the dollars and cents to do it. They can't get their hands on the right things. They can find the scientists to go out there and do that. So what has historically worked to keep them out of that nuclear club? It's those things, and we need to continue those things, keeping them from having the right items, the delivery systems, the materials to get to that point.
Hey, and again, I want to thank all of you for your persistence in sticking with us. But gosh, what an honor for me to be with Brian Mast. So anyway, y'all, best wishes to you, and be happy to answer any questions. And hey, working together, we want this to be bipartisan. Good gosh, this is again, it's suicide and it's insane. Thank you.